Well, hello and welcome to the closing keynote of day one. I'm Bill Selleck, co-chair of NAMLE's 2025 conference. We hope you've had an exceptional day of learning and networking. There were so many wonderful moments, but I have to say the highlight for me was hearing how even in the face of very tangible and fierce problems, our educators are putting students first at every step. We'd love to hear what your highlights were in the chat. Before we introduce tonight's speakers, I wanted to quickly mention 4 wonderful NAMLE resources and initiatives we hope you'll take advantage of. First, our community hub, which we launched last year. We've had so many members ask for an easier way to stay connected through this work. The hub is our way of offering a space to meet, collaborate, and share expertise. If you need help joining the hub, please reach out to us after the conference. Second, the Journal of Media Literacy Education, the JMLE, which is peer-reviewed, open-access academic journal for insightful media literacy research, reflection, and practice. Our updated core principles of media literacy education, released 2 years ago, have also now become translated into 5 languages thanks to our incredible NAMLE member volunteers. You can now find the core principles, which articulate NAMLE's position on media literacy education and the expanded implications for practice, which highlight distinguishing features of effective media literacy education. Translated now into Spanish, Brazilian and European Portuguese, Bulgarian, and Greek. Finally, you may not know about a coordinated effort for media literacy education with our National Media Literacy Alliance. Launched in 2020, the Alliance is a network of leading teacher member organizations that have come together to support the growth of media literacy across subject areas. We meet on a quarterly basis, support each other's efforts, attend and speak at each other's conferences, and work as a coalition committed to ensuring all teachers have the professional development they need and deserve to teach in our media-saturated and technology-driven society. So, if you're a member of any of these teacher organizations, your free membership with NAMLE helps to reinforce the important connections across all subject areas. All right, so now what we're all here for. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce this keynote, Connecting Students to 21st Century Tech Skills, AI Literacy and the Digital Divide. So this morning we learned about how 1 Minute Academy is introducing young people to video literacy skills and how this work is adapting to AI. Now we're broadening that focus to look at how we're connecting all students to technological and digital competencies, and specifically how our definition and understanding of this work is shifting as our world becomes more and more influenced by AI and algorithms. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Stephanie Flores-Coolish, NAMLE Board Vice President, to introduce the rest of the panelists.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our evening panel keynote. So it's great that we all are here. And I have the great pleasure of introducing these panelists and asking some rich questions that I'm really eager to hear their responses to. First, we have DeAndre Weaver. And Dr. Weaver is Vice President and has an awesome title of Chief Powerful Learning Officer for Digital Promise Global. He hails from the Windy City's South Side, has deep and vast experiences in K-12 education, which is awesome, from classroom teaching to administration. He centers his work around equity and learner-centered principles. So be sure to check out his full bio in the program to learn more about the powerful learning team that he oversees at Promise Global. Alex Catron is CEO of the AI Education Project, also known as AI EDU. Alex is from the Buckeye State and has an amazing pioneering background in AI and community organizing, which is just such an awesome combination. Perhaps because his mom was a teacher in Ohio, which inspired him in his interests to bring AI and education together. So please do also check out his lengthier bio in our program to learn more about Alex and AI EDU. And finally, we have Nate Stone. Nate is Senior Program Manager at the Digital Inclusion Alliance, a Colorado resident. Nate is a Peace Corps veteran with an awesome tale you'll find when you check out his bio. and he has vast experiences in technology education, library work, and a whole lot of supporting experiences to make this kind of work really soar. So let's go ahead and dive into tonight's conversation. And we want to start it out by really kind of thinking of this now kind of an older term, the digital divide. And so let's start out by finding out, from you all, like how typically that term has been really related more to access. Like, do the citizens, do the participants, do the students, do they have the funds and the resources to be able to have these kinds of resources? And so I'm wondering from you all, has that definition stood up in our current environment? And maybe how do you believe that it's morphed in terms of thinking about the digital skills gap that maybe has changed? And I will hand it over to DeAndre to start us off.
Yeah, happy to do it. I think most recently in the latest National Ed Technology Plan, um, that plan discusses three divides, and it posits it as the digital access divide, the digital design divide, and the digital use divide. Now, the digital access divide is what we commonly know as the digital divide to some degree, right? Do learners have access to the technology, the devices, the connectivity that they need to access the internet and to do digital things? We're also expanding that not just for devices and connectivity, but access to the right programs and opportunities to experience the applications and the technology products and tools that would allow students to do effective, efficient work and obviously experience artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. The digital design divide is really that divide between the educators that are prepared to use digital tools in a way that brings about stronger, deeper learning for learners. And that's something that we call powerful learning at Digital Promise. There was a recent, oh, not recent study, but right during COVID, there was a study of the percentage of teachers that felt prepared in order to use technology in the classroom. And half those teachers, 50% of those teachers did not feel prepared, either that their graduate schools did not prepare them, or education or certification programs did not prepare them well to use technology, or were they using, or nor were they using, or their school districts providing the adequate professional learning that's needed for them to understand and use technology for powerful learning. The third divide is the one that makes me cringe the most, but it is the divide between the learners in schools that get a chance to use technology to do really complex, complicated thinking, analysis, reasoning, and more importantly, creating. And then there are students and learners that are in schools that don't get that opportunity at all. I think I've been in hundreds of classrooms, thousands of classrooms, maybe even, where there are schools that have technology where kids are creating and building and fixing. And then there are also equally, or if not more, schools in certain parts of a state, a community, or a country that don't have access to any of those types of learning experiences that require them to use technology in meaningful ways. In fact, what I do see, if there are technology devices and connectivity, then learners are using those devices to do rote and basic tasks that they would normally have done in a workbook, right? So the digital access, the digital design, and the digital use divides are the ways in which we are kind of defining the new kind of digital divide today.
I really appreciate that widening of understanding of the concept. That makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate the way you explain that. Nate, yeah, you have some thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that that concept, well, to start out with, the old notion of the digital divide is still a very real thing, right? The access to decent broadband at decent speeds at affordable prices is really hard for still many people across the country. Um, Getting the right device is also a huge barrier as well. I think what one of the big changes that has happened in our field has been COVID really drove home the fact that we have to think of the divide not only that access on its own is not enough, that people need to be accompanied along the way by people who can help them build the skills that they need to actually use the things that got dropped off, right? We did a fantastic job here in Denver, Colorado, where I'm located, of putting hotspots in every student's household, right, during the pandemic. And when they ran the stats later on, they found something like a third of those never got turned on at all, right? Because people weren't given the support to actually use them. So the model that I do most of our work on at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance is called the Digital Navigator model, which is meant specifically to meet people's needs holistically around that digital divide. So I think that's one big shift. Though with a specific panel around AI, and having taught people how to use the internet for 20 years now, the thing that I've been thinking the most about recently is like an exposure gap or a harm gap, right? That there are I think of all of the years that I taught older adults and folks just getting out of prison how to get onto the internet without incorporating some basic digital privacy and digital security lessons and some basic media literacy ideas about verifying sources and things like that. And on my bad days, I wonder if I did more harm than good. And as we look at emerging technology, right? Especially with AI, there are communities that are having AI used on them as well as using AI themselves, right? And this tension of this tension, what makes me think about like taking a harm reduction approach to how we introduce AI to our communities, and avoiding the sort of the pressure of doing the mass adoption because it feels like that's what we're supposed to be doing, and being really mindful about how we approach things.
I appreciate that you took us into more of the current technologies, because it is hard to sort of think about this term of the digital divide and kind of stick within an old framework, given that, well, we are talking about AI as part of our panel, but also it's just difficult to talk about these topics without acknowledging that I have a visitor, without acknowledging that there definitely are some considerations with regard to today's technology. So with that, what are some of these new sorts of competencies that are needed in this new technology environment? What do you all think that are some of these skills that students need to be learning when we're talking about 21st century skills in 2025, which I heard, in a session earlier, it's, 2024 was a different year, and now it's just so rapid warp speed. So anyway, what are you all's thoughts? And Nate, you want to continue on with any of the ideas you started with?
I guess what we've seen in the field, at least amongst our affiliates and our experience, has been that the competency in using AI has to encompass both this sort of foundational understanding of the impacts that AI has on people's lives, right? As well as the individual ability to engage with it if people choose, right? So it's sort of more important than ever to sort of embed the technology learning in a social context, and in how and when are things appropriate to use, because as these are being rolled out to people, I often share the example of I was hiring for a position at the library I used to work at, and we were very specifically trying to hire folks who spoke English as a second language, and one of the job seekers got on the Zoom, and started reading answers that they had obviously fed the interview questions into ChatGPT or something, right? And we're just reading off by the second time they got to, well, there's 3 ways to answer this question, ... and in summary, ... right? We have this gap of folks being exposed to a thing without understanding, like there are social mores around how it is to be used, right? Like there's a sophisticated way to use AI and a not sophisticated way to use AI, and that those will impact that gap between people as well. So being very clear about how and when we use things, and making sure that we are prepping people, because as we were talking about backstage, right? Like online scams are just going to be supercharged through the use of AI, and so helping people protect themselves is going to be a core skill.
Yeah, let me shoot that over to Alex. What do you think some of these new digital competency skills are that are needed in today's shifting environment?
I mean, AI do sort of like often like surprises people in how old school we are. So my high level answer is, I think very little of it is new. I think everything that we taught around media literacy is still relevant. Now the content is changing in terms of, fake news used to be or like a questionable source, for example, it might be a blog that was written by a human and made to sound like a legit blog, and you had to sort of like go and interrogate. And now you obviously have like a much more sophisticated, hyper realistic, indistinguishable, video. So there's a component of it which is like, being aware that the capabilities exist, and that is new. But that's also temporal, right? It's like if you abstract that to a sort of continuous curiosity, I think that's also something that is certainly not new for educators. Lifelong learning is something we've been talking about. So there's good and bad to that. So like the good news is actually very little of this is new. So we know what to do. We have the smarts. NAMLE is like we don't have to create a new organization. Like we have this organization that has been doing this work for a long time now. The challenge is we have largely struggled to make media literacy something that is sort of truly fundamental to every single student's education. It's a lot more piecemeal. It's treated in many schools as a supplemental or as an enrichment. There aren't necessarily assessments, and so because schools are dealing with so much disruption and so much pressure, the only way to actually do this at scale is a systems change approach, which is that's what AIU does, right? It's like we come in and figure out like, what are the paths of least resistance to integrate into the existing apparatus of a school district, not introduce new things, but plug into their existing high quality instruction materials. And I think HQIM is a really potent channel for media literacy because, if you abstract media literacy into its most, fundamental part, critical thinking, there are truly a lot of ways for teachers, whether you're a math teacher, science, English, certainly English and social studies, but also math and science and computer science. Every class has scope to bring more critical thinking into the mix. And if students have critical thinking, that's they're, let's say, 80% of the way there. Because once you have critical thinking, then as you learn about these new capabilities, you have the facilities to be able to evaluate, like, well, what does this actually mean, and how do I need to sort of, how should I be thinking as I see, new videos? Yeah, I'll pause there.
Yeah, I think that's great.
DeAndre.
I'll build on that just a little bit. One of the ways that we advocate thinking about this question is really from a portrait of a learner perspective. So we encourage states, school districts, heck, the country, to think about what ultimately are we hoping that these human beings do in the world after they spend all these years with us. And part of it, as we think about digital competency, it's not, we think, not just about the digital skills, the ability to ethically use, understand, and evaluate, but it's also how do you leverage the uniquely human skills in a more digital world, right? It is how do we make sure that we don't have a bunch of people. I'm just thinking about when cell phones became the thing. I was, it was in a pretty formative part of my life. And we all of a sudden went to like our heads were always in our devices, and it still is. And how do we manage now that these devices can actually do generative things for us? All of this intelligence and expertise is now at everyone's fingertips. So now what? And so thinking about this idea of digital competency from a multi-pronged perspective, what does it mean to continue to be uniquely human in this age where all this technology is coming about? What does it mean to problem solve? Yes, critically think. Yes, make sense of. But more importantly, what does it mean to contribute? Contribution now is really like, how are we preparing learners to contribute, not in 18 years or 20 years, but like in sixth grade, meaningfully contribute to problems that are really important to them, to their communities, as a way to understand content, material, expertise, even more. I think that is the name of the game here.
I love this humanistic approach, and also just kind of taking us uh, back to basics in some way in terms of thinking about critical thinking and curiosity. These are just wonderful ways to kind of continue to uplift how media literacy can play a part in that, regardless of the tools, as Danelle posted in the chat there. And so, we've been trying, as we mentioned here, to get this in schools for a bit. And so I guess let's move to kind of, one would think that maybe this AI technology would compel us to kind of have school systems really finally take this seriously in a way to spread it more thoroughly. And yet, here we are. And so let's talk about policy for a second. There's been very little policy specifically, or strategy around AI policy. Nate, again, what from your experience would you advocate for related to comprehensive strategy around AI policy?
Um, we, as a national organization, our current belief is that the biggest thing that can be done to help in this situation and many others, is reversing the cancellation of the Digital Equity Act, because those were billions of dollars that were going to community practitioners, to schools, to governments, to nonprofits, that were going to do very concrete work to close that digital divide, in both the basic ways and these cutting edge ways. That would make the single biggest, that would be the single biggest policy thing that we would agree on, as well as renewing something like the Affordable Connectivity Program, and expanding and modernizing the Universal Service Fund, to make sure that that bedrock of actual connectivity and access is solid for the folks, that they get to then use the technologies and create with them as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That's very concrete, strategic suggestions. So what should schools be prioritizing? There's obviously a lot of anxiety out there. I'm a university professor, and, there's constantly concern about students relying exclusively on AI to write their papers and do all of their classroom work. And so, how can we keep updated with the pace of these updates that AI and new technologies are having? And I'm not talking about college necessarily, even though that's my experience, but K to 12 even, school leaders feel like they're lagging behind. What sort of guidance might you have for them? And how about we start with DeAndre now?
There's a lot, but I'm gonna concretize it in this. I remember when I learned how to drive. I learned how to drive in 19 by practicing in a 1988 Chevy Cavalier. It was a two-seater with a small back, and it didn't work really well. But I learned how to function on the road, how to be cognizant of others around me, defensive driving, having being expecting things and being prepared for that in advance, knew how to change lanes, all those things. Now, over the last few decades that I've been doing it, really doesn't matter what car I'm in, if it's a big truck when I'm driving people around, or if it's a major bus, or if it's anything that I am driving, a Lamborghini. I've never done it, but I want to. I still know the core basics. And I think one of the pieces that I'm most concerned about are schools and districts putting a lot of emphasis on trying to adopt practices for artificial intelligence, but still have rocky foundations for teaching and learning. And so the first part is like, are you clear about what your instructional focus is? Have you built enough systems across the organization or your campus to ensure that that is learned by your educators? It is deeply internalized, that you understand the fundamentals of literacy and reading and helping students learn, that you understand that learning is social. And so you have a responsibility of creating an environment that allows for good learning to happen. Do you understand how to design effective units of study by starting with the end and ensuring things are aligned? Do you understand the relationship between students, content, and teachers, and the tasks in which students are engaged? And if you have all those things in place, then you think about the ways technology can accelerate and deepen. That is the best guidance. You keep the main thing the main thing. Learning is learning. We have a huge body of research around how people learn. That's still real. And technology, artificial intelligence, emerging technologies can help accelerate, can help deepen, can help expand the possibilities. It's an additive perspective. It's not necessarily making the technology the course, the main dish. It is certainly a beautiful platter that can be used to serve strong content, really good learning experiences for learners.
Yeah, Alex, what are your thoughts on that? What should schools be prioritizing?
I mean, look, the issue of like whether is using ChatGPT cheating. It's like it's a good question. There's like a lot. There's sort of almost like a philosophical question about what is cheating and what is sort of the ethical value of doing something authentically. But the real point is teachers are right to be anxious because replace the word cheating with shortcuts. And it would be a bad thing if math teachers were assigning like math problems and not asking students to show their work and letting students use calculators. Because most students would just use a calculator to get the answer and then go play soccer or talk to their AI friend or whatever kids do nowadays after school. So ultimately what this like boils down to is the students are in general more adept at using AI tools than their teachers. And so there is this technology arbitrage that they're able to take advantage of. And yes, there are policies that need to be in place. You need to clearly communicate about academic integrity. Most schools that we've looked at, their academic integrity policies are pretty darn close. Like you should obviously update it to specifically name AI. There's a school in Massachusetts that actually got into hot water a little bit because they were not quite as explicit as they could have been. But the policies are just like a formality. The end of the day, the only like the biggest thing is teachers, in order to design assessments, design homework, and design learning experiences that students can't over rely on AI as a crutch. The teachers have to understand how to use it themselves. And that's kind of how all of this is connected. Is like if you're really focused on ensuring that AI doesn't debilitate teaching and learning, well, you're right back to AI literacy. And I think it's interesting because media literacy and like identifying like those components, it's so intersectional when you think about again, how is a teacher going to adapt in a homework assignment to be resilient to AI? Well, there's a lot of critical thinking that goes into that. There's you actually have to understand what the AI is capable of. And so again, the power of the fact that like there's a really big common set of learning that can address not all, but certainly a lot of like these really big question marks that, I think, and I really side with teachers on this. Like, I don't think they're Luddites. I think they understand their classrooms and they know that this is something that we can't just sort of gloss over.
Again, I appreciate the kind of both of you taking it to fundamental skills. And with some of the things you were talking about, DeAndre, I think back to how, many years ago, we would try to push those teachers who would show the movie as a reward to kind of make sure that they were thinking about how not to waste that opportunity, that teachable moment of having students actually analyze that movie and analyze camera angles and analyze the setup. Well, same thing, then technology is used as a babysitter. I was just meeting with one of my grad students the other day who's doing a project project, an investigation related to technology, and same thing. It's just really difficult to get people to see that you have to move beyond using these tools as just fillers and that we can be critically looking at them. So I really appreciate both all of your comments. I don't know, Nate, did you have something to add to that in terms of like what schools should be prioritizing?
I do think that there's I just want to echo what I think DeAndre said earlier about both DeAndre and Alex about we know how to do this already, right? That fact checking strategies, online privacy and security have been part of community digital inclusion programs for decades now, right? It's simply extending. We have to figure out how to extend those competencies to AI generated content, but those core skills are the same, right? And where we can help the most is by making these opaque systems transparent, right? Like kids are using these tools. Do they know how they are produced, what corpus they were trained on, how that influences what comes out of it, and where is it being used in their lives already, so that they can make that jump to as DeAndre pointed towards, to becoming producers and not just consumers of the tools.
So let me deepen this and push a little bit in terms of that, going back to like within the question, it was about the anxieties that are present. And Alex, you brought up that students are going to know these things more than teachers do. And yet, I'm sure there's plenty of students out there being duped by various kinds of deep fakes that are being created. One of the sessions I attended a little bit ago was talking about that and having students create their own sort of deep fakes, if you will, to kind of see how they're created. But I'm just wondering if you had, Alex, any additional sorts of thoughts and comments about how to, really push students to ensure that they truly do know this, because we can't just make an assumption that they're better than us just simply because of it being more in their sphere.
Yeah, I think there was like a study that some news organization did. And I'm sorry, I picked the quietest spot in my hotel lobby that turned into the noisiest spot. They surveyed 2,000 people and they were showing them different images and videos. And I think like 0.1% of respondents were able to accurately identify all of the AI generated content. It really is getting to a point where it's almost indistinguishable. And we should just assume that in, let's say, 2 to 3 years, that will be where we are. Like people say, well, look at the fingers in their hands, like that's out of date. I think like AI art is maybe the one exception where you can start to see, if you see enough AI art to use the tools, like you start to see it is kind of obvious. But it's probably going to be a bigger problem for adults. I think something like 30 to 40% of people over the age of 55 didn't even know what a deepfake was. So that's not the case for students. Students, they're seeing, because a lot of the deepfake content is on social media. And so I think, for better and worse, like TikTok is an incredibly effective communications channel for kids. But I think the worry that I have is, I really do think kids are just going to figure this out in terms of that deepfakes exist. But we can't take for granted that they are going to be like grappling with the implications of that in all of the right ways. Like it helps to have, like, not every student is going to reflect on, oh, the fact that there is this AI influencer that has 300,000 followers, now I need to be a little bit more skeptical when I see a celebrity peddling I think it was like Tom Hanks was peddling some sort of dental treatment, completely fake. And so I think that's part of the project of education, right? Is like, how do you, leverage inquiry, but in a structured way with like specific learning outcomes. And yeah, who better than educators and teachers? And what the challenge is, like, everybody needs to have this, and parents are going to need to have it. Like school leaders, politicians. But if you're going to try to boil an ocean, starting with K-12 is a fantastic place for us to really get it right.
And that's a great lead into one of our last main questions. So for the audience out there, please do put your questions in the Q&A box. So related to that then, where are we seeing some work being done effectively and successfully in this world of AI media literacy or AI education? And maybe how do we perhaps engage outside of formal institutions of education, even though it breaks my heart a little bit to say that, but education as a system has a lot of regulations and it's slow to move. And then additionally, then what are some examples of the sort of cross-sector collaborations needed to maybe make strides here? So I'll start with DeAndre.
Yeah, I'll be a little biased here. We have a long-standing partnership with Verizon. They have created a program now. We're prepping for our 13th cohort, where they make significant investments in schools and districts around a comprehensive approach around digital transformation, starting with ensuring that every middle school or high school, every learner in those schools that are selected has a device and connectivity for 4 years or for the duration of the time that they're in the school when they start. In middle school is 3 years, or from sixth to the eighth grade, and high school is 4 years. Ensure that every educator has a device. And then what I'm really excited about is that they support over the course of a 4-year technologist by providing technologists on campus, so instructional coaches, technology coaches. They pay a stipend for those individuals to be in schools, and then they pay a stipend for the IT coach, and then they provide 4 years of professional learning, job embedded professional learning, to help with the integration of technology, any technology, into the core learning experience. That is a deep commitment in schools, significant dollars invested in hundreds of schools, millions of learners that have been impacted, helping to not only close digital access divides, but close the digital use divide and the digital design divide in one fell swoop. There are a number of opportunities and other programs that are addressing different aspects of these divides, but this one is probably one of the most comprehensive partnership, not just a program, not just a fly-by-night small investment, but continued partnership in schools and districts across the country for years. And I think it's an amazing example of it.
Nate, you have some examples as well, I believe, right?
Yeah, I do. You asked about how do you engage with folks outside of formal institutions of education, and I would love to connect you with any of our 200 to 2,000 affiliates who are doing this work in nonprofits and after school programs and libraries, right? Community digital inclusion programs reach folks with all kinds of different educational backgrounds and digital skill backgrounds. And it's a fantastic way to reach people with exposure who have not had exposure to those foundational AI concepts. And there are people who are experimenting, particularly to touch on this, the K through 12 focus here, with doing intergenerational training around all sets of digital skills, right? There's we just we have an AI working group in the Digital Inclusion Alliance, and there's someone recently showcased this project where they had both like 12-year-olds and 65-year-olds working together, learning how to use these tools and the focus was like on entrepreneurship and a small business, right? But so you got to see the 12-year-old making her Disney inspired AI art to have a conversation about trademark and copyright, but then also showing her community members, her older community members, her elders, on how to use them, and the elders informing her about how to use things as well. Because I think the other dangerous thing, to sort of harken back to the question we had before, is that this notion of digital native keeps coming, like it will not die, and it's coming back even stronger with AI. This assumption that the kids coming in the door are natives and they just know how to use it, and they're not scared to touch it for sure, but do they know what it does, how it does it, when it's appropriate to use it, they do not, right? So there's always something to teach younger folks, in particular those intergenerational contexts. I think can be really strong in showing that. Yeah, those are the examples I'd love to share.
I love that. And, another hat I wear in my work is working with community schools, because here in the state of Maryland, where I live, we have legislation that has created 40% of our schools as being community schools, which provides that kind of space for that to happen in the after school timeframe generally, or before school. And intergenerational learning is definitely a powerful component. So I love the way that you talk about that. And there are ways to bring it into at least the brick and mortar schools. So we do have some questions in the Q&A that I'm gonna shoot out at you all, and feel free, any of the three of you who wants to answer, to unmute and take it. So our first attendee, anonymous attendee, is asking if there's any AI rubrics or school policies that are perhaps publicly available, so they don't have to recreate the wheel, even though I think AI probably could do that. But anyway, and also, what is each of your own personal take on the use of AI in the classroom, and what conversations do you think need to be held before or after AI use? So actually, those are kind of two different sorts of questions, but anyone want to take one of those on, or both?
I can go super quickly. We worked with a couple. We just helped facilitate a 16-member working group at San Diego Unified School District, helped them come up with their AI strategy. We also co-wrote the state of Ohio's AI policy toolkit. So I'm gonna I was just pulling up the link because they literally have what you were asking for, like templatized. It's a lot. What we do with Ohio is a really long sort of it's an intense document, but it's really more of a roadmap, because this is not just like a one and done. This is actually going to be sort of an ongoing evolution that schools are going to have to take.
Are you going, Nate? I just saw you go off mute. Digital Promise has authored a few pieces. I just put one. I don't know if I put it in the right chat, but maybe somebody can help me out with that. But we have an emerging technology adoption framework for pre-K through 12th grade educators. We've developed an AI literacy framework. Tons of tools out there. Just knowing the right places to go. And the second part of the question. Is I mean, I think is a really good question. And I think personally for me, it is, I love to see, and we do this at home. So we're modeling this for our own children, but I love to see AI being used in ways that can accelerate a teacher's ability to be effective at delivering strong teaching and learning. If the technology could be used to help better facilitate a small group or guided practice, for instance. It's a great way. If the technology can be used to help with metacognition, or a demonstration that can give learners a really good example, an exemplar of what excellent looks like. It's a really good use. If the technology can be used by learners to demonstrate evidence of something, and then that evidence could be critiqued and evaluated, and then something new produced. It's a really, really good way to use it. It's a great way to use AI is to help analyze large troves of data. And then asking students to do something with the results. So it is always a 1, 2, 3, 4 approach. And it always comes back for me to, in what ways is the learner grappling with either an output or something that they can use to create a good prompt to get an output to then assess. And that just requires a rethinking about how educators are planning learning experiences. How are they planning experiences to be not just engaging at all, but to give learners agency. So how can artificial intelligence and emerging technologies be used to help learners pursue knowledge and action, choice and voice in new and different ways? How can artificial intelligence be used to help learners establish their purpose, to deeply engage with authentic and meaningful material, to make authentic and meaningful contributions? How can artificial intelligence or other emerging technologies be used to spark more curiosity in learners? How can we use that as the new hook to get learners excited about a unit, a lesson, a concept, so that they can then do a further deep dive, right? How can we use emerging technologies to foster deeper connection with other people, content, and others, right? So I think those are the ways that I want to say Digital Promise is thinking about this idea of powerful learning and how learners can use technology to go more deeper into the things that really matter the most.
Nate?
Yeah, I'm just gonna fanboy for a second and say, if you haven't checked out the Digital Promise AI stuff, please do, because it is amazing. I've used it for so long. It's so good. I the second part of that question that I feel like is the really interesting one, and just to make it really concrete, like this is what we're like DeAndre. My kids are 12 and 9, so we're already doing this at home, right? Um, and the thing that I think the most about using it in any classroom situation, whether it is children or adults, is that we do, the vast majority of people use, when they learn an AI tool, it's usually a large language model, and they usually use it to produce text. And humans think because we write, right? Like language is what makes us human and what makes us have minds. that language is what makes us thinkers. And so introducing AI at a point where it is refining text or suggesting ways to go on, rather than generating it from the get-go, has been the baseline in my household, and the way that we sort of look at introducing it to learners. But that because it has the potential to take over such a foundational act as writing, as thinking. I think it's really being really thoughtful about where, I think not avoiding it, but be thinking very carefully about where it is introduced in the process, and talking very clearly about its limits and where it is applied is super key.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, Pamela has a couple of things in the chat, and I think both essentially swirl around funding issues. And so this takes us to this question of digital divide that still persists. One of those elements that you talked about, DeAndre. So some of the tools within AI that are good to use in a classroom still cost some money. So do you all know of some funds that are available, or how do you talk with schools and districts that need, to do the most robust work? They need the funds.
One of the ways that we talk with schools and districts, and this is why we start with what is your vision for teaching and learning, and then what is the vision for the role technology can play to support and accelerate that. Because when you do that, and then when you concretize that in your strategic plan, and when that cascades down in your organization from a district level all the way to your campuses, to your classrooms, to the learning experiences, then it becomes a priority. Well, if it's a priority, then you start to look at everything else that you're funding and figure out, is this more of a priority than what we're spending on X platform? Is this more of a priority than what we're spending on this type of device? And how can we leverage what we already have to make investments in what we think will matter the most for learners? So part of it is scan what you currently have, figure out what's most important that's aligned to your vision, and then support that with what you have. Because we can talk about grants and contributions, but those have an end date. And you don't want to create a priority that is relying on external funds to fund it. And so it becomes about managing and thinking about your resources differently. Maybe you don't have every single tool that uses AI for literacy, but you have one strong vetted tool that is certified from organizations like a Digital Promise or an ISTE that has gone through rigorous research and testing and analysis that adheres to the learning sciences. And maybe you use that one tool and you ensure that your 25,000 educators or your 2,000 educators understand how to use that tool deeply with their content and give them multiple opportunities to experience it in different environments. I'm about core learning here, right? For professional development. So you're not necessarily thinking about how can you get more money to buy more things. You're thinking about how can you use money you have to go deeper with what matters the most and what's research based to be effective, so that you can get the results that you want to get, that the company thinks you'll get, because now you're focused on implementing and not just curating items because it's hot and it's cool. Sorry, that may not have been the answer. Sorry, I didn't point you to specific funding, but I think that's the most sustainable way to think about resource allocation and resourcing your priorities in this age.
I appreciate that. It's like it's a good you're talking like an administrator now. So I hear that administrative sort of discussion that certainly can happen, especially if done in community too. You know, if the community kind of has say and some parents are aware of this. But let's kind of shift gears here to go to what Scott has posted, because he's kind of taking us back to thinking about some of the nefarious aspects of AI. And so he's asking, you know, how do we get young people conceptually at a higher level to understand the cumulative impact of AI audio and imagery influence on their belief systems, you know, especially as it pertains to perceptions of marginalized communities. But we can, you know, put that on a lot of different aspects, political and whatnot. So I don't know who wants to take that one, but, you know,
It's gonna be really hard. It's gonna be really, really hard. We Part of the challenge that, you know, as we introduce, you know, as schools, let's say, move forward with having AI chatbots and AI tutors and AI mentors, and students are going home and talking to their AI companions. This is not like a future state. Like 30 million people a month log into Character AI, which is like the biggest chatbot platform, and the average user is spending about 2 hours a day on that platform. So this is sort of like the current state of affairs. And AI is like, you know, it's good at a lot of things. The thing that it consistently outperforms humans the best at is persuasion. So we have our work cut out for us, but we can't throw our arms up in the air. And so I just go back to like, what is because we don't know what the persuasion was gonna look like. It might not be chatbots, it might be more subtle. And I guess the only sort of like vaccine is like critical thinking skills. And that orientation towards maybe a healthy skepticism, which I'm not gonna, but it unlocks other questions, right? Which is like, what is it gonna be like to be a kid where you basically are being told you can't trust anything? So yeah, this is gonna be very hard.
And
But
Alex,
again, why we need organizations like yours.
yeah.
and Stephanie, this is why I started with this idea of what does it mean to be human and how do we continue that thread? Because what we have to do more of, we should already be doing it. It has been uh, proven that this is real and true, but we got to teach people to understand people, empathy, compassion, get to know, just because we're different does not mean that we don't have value. And understanding that regardless of what a bot says, that just because that person looks like you does not mean that they're evil, that they're bad, that they're dumb, that they're nasty, that they're ugly. That is what we have to be intentional about teaching. That is a human. That's what we mean when we say keep humans in the loop, not just like keep educators in the picture. We don't want AI taking their jobs. We have to keep humanity in the loop. How do we continue to educate people to be great citizens, to respect differences, to value other people's value, to collaborate, to communicate, to be curious about other people in our society, and then be skeptical of any tool that tells us differently than what we know to be true? It's how I'm raising my kids. I'm sure Nate and others, this is how you're raising your children, right? So we have to think about our next generation as human beings and be even more intentional about teaching humans how to be human.
I love that, DeAndre, and I'm at a Jesuit institution, so plug for the Jesuits, but really that we're all about cura personalis, care for the whole person. And AI is a piece that is a part of our foundation that we're talking about too. So we just have like a very brief time. I wonder if we want to do a rapid go round with any last quick comment. And we can start with DeAndre since you just last talked, and then we'll kind of go around to Alex and then Nate.
I'm really excited about this age that we're headed into, that we're in, and that we're headed into. It's full of mystery and wonder, and I believe in the power of people to be able to ride this new wave of technology, this disruptive technology, in a way that still allows us to be human and to center the things that are most important. And I think this idea of accelerating the types of experiences that learners have that are powerful, and using technology in service of what we know to be true from an evidence-based perspective, is something that we're going to be screaming from the mountaintops as much as we possibly can, because we are not. We think that there is still value in what the literature says to be true about learning. And we think technology can just do a really good job at helping in some ways. And in some ways, we should not be using it at all.
Alex? You got to unmute.
I feel a little bit bad because my comments tend to always be quite pessimistic. And so the thing that I want to close on, which I don't know if this is even fully relevant, but I think it's important to just sort of underscore, is this is we are going to succeed or fail based on whether we're able to effectively build capacity and leverage and empower our educators. And we're in a moment where educators they're, for whatever reason, being treated at the bottom of the barrel, and nobody wants to give them pay increases. And the average, I think only 18% of teachers would even recommend their job to someone. And so we have this huge societal challenge, and it's a moment, obviously, to leverage them as a resource. But I also, I like this idea of actually this being educators' moment, and almost like shifting the narrative from this is something that's happening to educators to this is something where all the solutions we've talked about are fundamentally grounded in learning, and educators are, more so than anybody else, this is their expertise, and it's our duty to make sure that they have the resources, the complements, to be able to shine. But so yeah, on a positive note.
Kudos to your mom, Alex. All right, Nate.
Yeah, everything other people said, and that I think if I would leave with anything else, having seen multiple things crest and fall, right? The multiple trends come and go. I think the important thing that I've been holding on to is that Zoomerism and Doomerism are flip sides of the same coin, right? They both assume that something is inevitable and world changing, and we can find a place in the middle. The folks the folks who said that AR and VR was going to change everything have yet to deliver on any of that. All of the God, I mean, just well, so and I think the other thing to think to take back is to think about how is that also gives you some historical examples to pull on, right? That my grandma was radicalized by Facebook by getting on the internet early, right? And that was before it was hypercharged by people being able to just put out AI slop, right? So how do we find people's how do we find that hook that pulls people in? How are they already using it? And how do we get to them to connect to the human element of it? And then how do we expose the inside of it? Because people who know how a thing is made, that understand how it is delivered to them, are are better able to respond to it and think critically about it than they are if they're just passive consumers of that as a tool.
Here, here. Thank you so much. Thank you to the three of you. It was a really rich conversation, and I appreciate you.